All right, boys, girls. I wanted to read The Printer. Uh, Ideally, I'd like to read it with you, but I'm going to have to read it to you. Full screen view. There we go. Apple L. Okay, so it's The Printer by Myron Oldberg, illustrated by Henri Sorensen. And it is from this reading passage that the grade 3 spelling words are chosen. And first thing I notice is that picture in the center, right here. Notice how it's kind of got sort of an old-fashioned look to it. So that already tells me that this story is happening in the past. All right, so again, I see this bus here, and it's an old-fashioned bus. I see these older type of cars. And so I do know that this story is happening in the past. And let's start here. My father was a printer. He wore a printer's four-cornered newspaper hat. Every day after work, he brought home the next day's paper. After reading it, he always folded a page into a small hat and gently placed it on my head. I would not take off my newspaper hat until bedtime. My father was deaf. Though he could not hear, he felt through the soles of his shoes the pounding and rumbling of the giant printing presses that daily spat out the newspaper he helped create. So before the internet, boys, girls, is people would get most of their news and information from a newspaper. And there was a lot of work involved in putting together a newspaper, and you'll see some of that in the upcoming pages. But this young boy, his father is deaf. At work, I don't know if he's checking to make sure everything's right. As a boy, my father learned how to speak with his hands. As a man, he learned how to turn lead type letters into words and sentences. My father loved being a printer. Sometimes my father felt sad about the way he was treated by his fellow workers who could hear. Because they couldn't talk to him with their hands, they seemed to ignore him. Years went by as my father and the hearing printers worked side by side. They never once exchanged a single thought. This is actually kind of a sad situation that I'll continue. But my father did not lack friends, meaning he did have friends. There were other printers at the plant who were deaf. They also learned to talk with their hands. One day, while the giant presses ran their noises, shutting out all the other sound, my father spotted a fire flickering in a far corner of the press room. The fire was spreading quickly, silently. Suddenly, the wood floor burst into flames. My father knew he had to tell everyone. He couldn't speak to shout a warning. Even if he could, no one would hear him over the loud roar of the presses. The presses are the machines that are sort of stamping the letters and words and sentences onto the paper, and would have been very loud. But he could speak with his hands. So he's grabbing a rag, a red towel. It looks like he's trying to shout. And my deaf friend, he could shout. He couldn't use words, but he could make noise. So I'm not sure if that's what he's trying to do. Oh, and then you see here at the top, he's standing on top of something, trying to get people's attention. He did not hesitate. He jumped onto an ink drum and waved his arms excitedly until, clear across the room, he caught the attention of a fellow printer who also couldn't hear a sound. My father's hands shouted through the terrible noise of the printing presses, "Fire! Fire! Tell everyone to get out. Tell the hearing ones." Remember, back in this time, boys and girls, most of the workplaces were made with wood, not concrete. So the concrete doesn't really catch fire, but if your workplace is made out of wood and a fire starts, there were horrible, horrible fires in cities when most of the buildings were made from wood. His friends climbed up onto a huge roll of newsprint. His fingers screamed to the other deaf workers, "Fire! Fire! Tell the hearing ones." All the printers who couldn't hear ran to fellow workers who could. They pointed to the fire, which had now spread to the wall next to the only exit. Not one of my father's friends left until everyone knew of the danger. My father was the last to escape. By the time everyone had fled, the fire, I didn't say that correctly. Good readers go back and say things correctly. So please keep that in mind. You guys are also learning to read. Even I'm still learning to read. By the time everyone had fled the fire, feeding on huge quantities of paper, the fire had engulfed the enormous plant, the giant presses, some still spewing out burning sheets of newspaper, had fallen partly through the floor. Great shafts of flame shot out of the bursting windows. The printers stood in the street, broken glass at their feet. They embraced one another as the fire engines arrived. They were happy to be alive. My father stood alone, struck numb by the last image of the burning presses. The fire destroyed the printing presses. The plant had to close for repairs, but not one printer had been hurt. When the printing plant finally reopened, my father went back to the work he loved. The new presses were switched on and roared into life. When the day's newspaper had been printed, the presses shuddered to a stop. Now there was silence. In the midst of the stillness, my father's co-workers gathered around him. They presented him with a hat made of the freshly printed newspaper. As my father put the hat on his head, all the printers who could hear did something surprising. They told them "thank you" with their hands. That night, my father picked up the newspaper hat that his fellow printers had given him. After adjusting the four corners, he placed it gently on my head. I didn't take off my hat, but I wore it carefully to bed. I imagined I was standing next to my father on a vast printing press floor, turning lead-type letters into words and sentences. We were wearing four-cornered newspaper hats. Okay, so the newspaper hat is something called a symbol, and it's a symbol for the people who are working so hard to create a newspaper, and the newspaper being something incredibly important at that time. So to produce those newspapers, the workers would feel a sense of pride. And it's very nice because the father in this story is sharing that pride with his son. In terms of being deaf, his hearing co-workers, or the hearing people that he worked with, in the end recognized how important it was that the people who couldn't hear recognized that there was a fire and warned everyone and got everyone out and thought of other people first and got them out, and they were the last to leave. And that action earned respect from the workers who could hear. And they showed that newfound respect by learning to say thank you with their hands. All right, and you are to write a paragraph about what would it be like to have a friend who's deaf. And I'm going to write a paragraph right now, and then I'll take a picture of it and post it online. I hope you enjoyed The Printer, and that's Mr. V's reading, and I will post that.